I'm a 24-year-old woman, and my mother has believed since the day I was born that the only thing worth chasing in life is money. Not stability, not love, not health, just pure financial status. And not the kind that comes from working your way up or building something real. No, she wanted wealth that came with names you could drop and country clubs that wouldn't let you in unless your family had been there for 3 generations. Growing up, I never had a birthday party that didn't look like a corporate gala. My mother made a whole production out of everything because she always invited people we had no real business associating with, daughters of CEOs, sons of real estate moguls, and wives of doctors who vacationed in Monaco. She'd rent luxury cars just to park them outside our house. Our actual car was a beat-up sedan she made my father drive around the block and hide whenever people came over. When I was 17, I had my first real boyfriend. His name was Marco, and he wanted to be a chef. He was sweet, thoughtful, and saved up for months just to take me out for sushi on our 6-month anniversary. When my mother found out he lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with his family and his dad drove a city bus, she went ballistic. She told me I could either end the relationship or stop being her daughter. I cried for 3 days before I finally did it. I didn't even tell Marco the real reason, I just ghosted him. After that, I stopped telling her about anyone. Not that there was much to tell. She spent the next few years building a fantasy around me. She would casually tell her friends I was seeing someone in finance or dating the son of a tech CEO. I was single the whole time. But every lie gave her another excuse to hold her head a little higher in her social circles. The real blow came when I turned 21. I thought she'd ease off as I got older, but instead, she gave me an ultimatum. She told me she'd made peace with not having a rich husband herself, but that it was my job to correct the mistake. I had 2 choices: marry someone earning 6 figures or leave her house. No wiggle room. No discussion. At that point, I didn't even have access to my own savings. She had helped me open a joint account when I was 18 and quietly moved most of it out. When I asked what happened to my college fund, she said she'd used part of it for a social exposure seminar I had supposedly attended, basically a weekend networking course for women trying to marry rich. I remember sitting in a hotel ballroom next to a woman who was 35 and openly said she was looking to lock down a hedge fund baby before her eggs got any older. My father? He just stood there and told me, "You know how your mother gets." She kept up her pressure by controlling the people around me. Any friend who wasn't from money slowly disappeared. She talked to them privately, asked them invasive questions, or act condescending until they stopped calling. At one point, I had a friend named Halima, whose father ran a local grocery store. One day, Halima just stopped texting back. A month later, I found out my mother told her she was a distraction. By 22, she started parading men into our living room like we were hosting open house interviews. She'd host these casual dinners with her friends and their sons, guys I had zero connection with, most of them clearly there under pressure from their mothers too. One of them asked me how much I weighed before dessert was even served. Despite it all, I tried to build something for myself. I got an internship and eventually a job at a small startup doing marketing. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the energy, the freedom. 1 week before I was going to go full-time, the CEO pulled me aside and asked if I was serious about staying. Apparently, my mother had called him directly and said I was just experimenting with the workforce before marriage. At 23, I met Dorian. He was the kind of person who didn't pretend to be anything. He was working on a graphic novel and did freelance art to pay the bills. He lived in a small studio, rode a bike, and got genuinely excited about secondhand bookstores. I kept him a secret for 6 months. I couldn't risk her finding out. Of course she did. She started tracking my phone without telling me. One evening, she showed up unannounced at Dorian's place and acted like she had just caught me doing drugs. She called him poor trash and told me to get in the car. When I refused, she gave me 48 hours. Either break up with him and attend a charity fundraiser with the son of a lawyer she'd picked out, or pack up and leave. I chose to leave. I had $600 in my bank account, a laptop, and a duffel bag of clothes. Dorian let me crash on his couch. The last thing my mother said to me was, "Don't come crawling back when this fantasy collapses." I didn't say a word. I just walked out. I was crashing on Dorian's futon in his studio apartment for the first few weeks after I left home. Most of my stuff was still in my childhood room, but I wasn't going back for it. He cleared a corner of the room for my clothes and set up a small desk so I could work. I started picking up freelance writing gigs, product descriptions, blog posts, anything I could get my hands on. Some days I made enough to buy groceries. Some days I didn't. For almost a full month, I didn't hear anything from my mother. Not a single call or message. But my aunt, who usually stayed out of drama, started texting me cryptic things like "keep your guard up and there are discussions happening." She wouldn't explain more. I figured it was just my mother complaining to everyone in her social group about how I'd gone off the rails. Then one morning she called. The number wasn't blocked. I froze when I saw it. She didn't sound angry or panicked. Just calm, like nothing had happened. She asked if I wanted to have lunch. I didn't know what game she was playing, but I was too curious not to go. We met at a high-end hotel restaurant uptown, one of those places where even the menus look expensive. She was already seated, sipping sparkling water, acting like we were old friends catching up. I didn't say much, just waited. And then she dropped it. A family she knew had a son who was ready to propose. He was in private equity, owned 3 properties, and had just turned 28. She said this like it was the weather forecast. She slid a folder across the table, thick, organized, and color-coded. Inside was his resume, family background, photos from his Instagram, and even a list of shared interests that I could tell were based on a LinkedIn stock rather than real compatibility. Then came the offer. If I agreed to meet him and keep an open mind, she'd give me $50,000. She called it a gift to get back on my feet. The message was clear: get rid of Dorian, fall in line, and I'd be rewarded. I asked about Dorian. She laughed like I'd mentioned a summer job, called him a phase, said I was too smart to let a temporary distraction destroy a legacy. Her words, not mine. Later that week, I found out the plan had been in motion for a while. My father had gone to dinner with the guy's parents, a compatibility dinner, they called it. He never once told me, didn't check in, just co-signed on the whole thing like he was signing a delivery slip. Then came the worst part. My cousin, who'd always been more of a sibling than a relative, sent me screenshots of an email thread between my mother and a few of her friends. She wrote that the crisis has passed and that I was on the path to redemption. She even said the engagement would be announced at an upcoming charity gala. I hadn't even agreed to meet the guy yet, but I did meet him. His name was Callum. We got coffee at a cafe that clearly wasn't his choice. He showed up in a tailored jacket and loafers with no socks, looked me in the eye and told me he was only there because his mother threatened to cut him off if he didn't at least try. We both agreed. This wasn't happening. He flew out to Dubai a week later for a work project and never followed up. My mother lost it. She left voicemails, texted me nonstop, even sent a 3-paragraph message to Dorian's art page claiming I was destroying my life. Then she showed up at our apartment. Again. This time she waited outside until Dorian came back from a grocery run and tried to guilt him into talking. He asked her to leave. She called the police and claimed he was harassing her. That pushed us over the line. Dorian filed a report and we started the process for a restraining order. We also contacted the building manager because she had somehow convinced a neighbor to let her into the lobby more than once. We found out she had sent a woman, some vague friend from the gym, to knock on our door and pretend to be looking for a lost dog. When I asked her who sent her, she just smiled and said she was told someone needed help here. We moved a few weeks later. New place, new locks, different part of the city. I didn't tell anyone in my family where. We packed everything in 2-car trips and left the futon behind. Starting over was necessary. But the damage? That didn't stay behind. A few weeks after we moved, Dorian started getting emails from random accounts. At first they looked like spam, generic subject lines, vague threats, but then they got more personal. One called him a parasite. Another accused him of using me to climb out of poverty. A few even referenced his past projects, twisting details like he had lied about everything. We brushed it off until one came with a screenshot of his art posted next to an old photo of me and my mother at a fundraiser from years ago. That one wasn't public anywhere. Then his publisher called. They had received an anonymous tip. The message claimed Dorian was manipulating a vulnerable woman from a wealthy background and using that connection to position himself as an underdog artist. But they said there were reputational concerns and that, until everything was reviewed, they were pausing his promotional cycle and delaying the rollout of his next release. They asked for a detailed timeline of our relationship, how we met, when we started dating, where we lived, who we talked to about the book. Dorian gave them everything he had. I started pulling receipts too, screenshots of my old texts with him, photos, rent receipts, a calendar with the date I moved in. It didn't feel like defending a relationship. It felt like building a legal case. A friend of ours from Dorian's art circle works in digital security. He offered to trace the email headers just to see if anything stood out. A day later, he called and asked me to sit down. Every single email had been routed through a VPN, but the original IP, before masking, matched the service provider at my parents' house. Same zip code, same signal bounce pattern, same timestamp footprints from our old neighborhood. I didn't call my mother. I called my father. He didn't deny it. He just got quiet and said my mother had hired a reputation consultant who might have taken it too far. The consultant had apparently pitched a plan to rebrand me publicly if I accepted a different relationship narrative. When I refused to cooperate, the strategy changed. My aunt called me the next night. She was crying. There had been a family dinner and my mother told everyone that Dorian was a leech who had emotionally manipulated a girl raised to marry better. My aunt said half the table went silent. The other half nodded along. I sat down and started building a folder. Every text from my mother. Voicemails, screenshots of the emails, headers, comparison timelines. I included receipts from when she tried to offer me money to marry the other guy, messages she sent Dorian's art page, even that folder she gave me at lunch with the resume inside. I sent the full folder to Dorian's publisher and also to a legal contact a friend connected me with. Meanwhile, I uploaded a compressed version of the evidence to a private link and sent it to the top 5 people in my mother's social circle, the ones she cared about the most. Women she hosted brunches with. The ones who co-chaired events and lent her dresses and name-dropped their way through art exhibits. I didn't say much, just dropped a message that they might want to know who they've been working with. Within days, the fallout began. One of her closest friends backed out of a charity fundraiser they were supposed to co-host. Another pulled her name off a shared fashion auction invite. Her book club disbanded quietly, without a word. Her phone number stopped being listed in the committee directory for the local women's council. Then she was asked to step down completely. Sponsors had pulled out. One even issued a formal statement about not supporting personal harassment tactics. Her social currency collapsed, and she blamed me. I got a voicemail where she accused me of sabotaging her life, called me worse than poor, and said she had wasted everything on someone who couldn't even keep quiet. I blocked her number. Permanently this time. No second line. No burner. No loophole. A week later, something unexpected happened. A literary agent messaged me through my freelance portfolio site. She had seen a blog post I'd written, something small about privacy and control. She asked if I had ever thought about writing a memoir. Dorian and I talked about it. We knew it would be hard and public, but we also saw the potential. That week, we started mapping out a joint graphic novel. It would follow a woman whose life was designed by someone else, but instead of folding, she rewrites the script. It's not a revenge story. It's a rewrite. This time, the ending is ours. It started with a message from Claudia, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. We were close in college, but drifted like most people do. She messaged me out of nowhere asking if I was doing okay and mentioned that she had run into my mother at a boutique event. I already knew it was going somewhere bad, but I kept reading. Claudia said my mother had told her I was battling an addiction and that Dorian was unstable and potentially dangerous. She sounded confused more than anything, like she wanted to help but didn't know what to believe. I didn't even have to guess where it came from. The next 2 days proved it wasn't a one-off. 2 more people I hadn't talked to in months reached out. Both of them said they'd been contacted through a mutual connection, and both repeated similar lines, concerns about Dorian, questions about whether I was in trouble, and hints about me needing a safe place to land. It was like someone had handed them a script. One of them, Tony, finally told me the truth. He had met my mother once during a university event years ago, and had kept her number since then. A few days earlier, she messaged him and asked if he could do her a favor. The favor was trying to convince me to leave Dorian. She offered him $500 up front and promised more if I agreed to come home. Banini, me still like mission. I called every single person who had contacted me. I told them exactly what was happening, walked them through the restraining order, the digital harassment, and even showed screenshots and proof. Most were horrified. A few stayed quiet. I noticed which ones stopped following me afterward. Around the same time, my mother started following their social media pages. She was commenting under their old photos with vague messages, like hope she's okay and praying for her healing. On Dorian's old artwork posts, she left thumbs down emojis and a single-word comment, danger. The accounts weren't private. Anyone could see them. It wasn't subtle. Dorian offered to deactivate his profiles for a while. He said if it would stop her from spiraling further, he didn't mind stepping back. I told him not to. Hiding wouldn't fix it. He had already built his community, his audience. He wasn't going to shrink to make space for her chaos. Then a mutual friend, whose dad works in private security, pulled me aside at a small gathering. She said she overheard her father talking about someone from the district asking for a discreet private investigator to track a woman and her boyfriend. The woman claimed her daughter had been taken in by a manipulator, and she wanted to make sure she wasn't in danger. The description matched too closely to ignore. That same week, we found a gift bag sitting outside our apartment door. No card, no note. Inside was a necklace, silver dainty, something I would have liked back in high school. Dorian thought it was suspicious, so he opened the clasp and noticed something strange. The back had a small bump. He took it to a tech-savvy friend who examined the bump under the clasp and confirmed it was a tiny Bluetooth tracker, the kind used for product testing or pet collars. We reported it to the police immediately. The restraining order violation report was updated. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was surveillance. Then she went after my job. One of my freelance clients forwarded me an email they got from someone claiming to be my mother. The message called me unstable, said I had violent mood swings, and warned them about working with me. Luckily, my client didn't fall for it. Instead, they sent me the email and asked if I was okay. They told me they'd keep the contract going, but suggested I switch to a business alias for a while. Some of my friends didn't want the heat. One sent a short message saying, I can't keep getting pulled into this. Another unfollowed me and then soft blocked Dorian. The pressure was too much for them, I guess. I didn't respond, I just noted who was still standing with me when things got loud. Then came the handwritten letters. My mother had other people deliver them. 2 came from neighbors of my childhood home, another from a woman I vaguely remembered from church. They weren't threats. They were guilt bombs. Phrases like a mother's heart can only take so much, and how will she survive without her only daughter? That was the final push. I made another public post online. This time, I didn't blur the lines. I described how she contacted my friends, tried to bribe them, planted a tracker, and reached out to my employer. I attached photos of the gift, screenshots of her messages, and the report we filed with the police. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself. It gained traction. Fast. Within 2 days, the post had gone viral. Media outlets started reaching out asking for interviews, and advocacy groups offered help. A few even said this could be part of a larger pattern they'd seen before. I didn't answer anyone right away. I just sat with Dorian on the fire escape of our apartment that night. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. She had tried everything: bribery, manipulation, lies, surveillance. And still, we were here, together, alive, untouched by her money. 2 weeks after I posted about the tracker and everything else my mother had done, I got a knock at the door, so a court officer handed me a sealed envelope and left without a word. Inside was a legal summons. My mother had filed for adult guardianship over me. She had filed for adult guardianship, a rare legal action usually reserved for individuals with diagnosed mental conditions, not independent adults with jobs and stable housing. But her petition tried to paint me as unstable and vulnerable. At first, I thought it was a scam, but the paperwork looked too official. I called the court clerk. She pulled up the case file and confirmed it: real court date, real case number, real petition. The listed reasons were emotional instability, financial recklessness, and coercion by an older manipulative partner. She was trying to take full legal control of my life. Finances, living arrangements, medical decisions, everything. And if she won, she could force me out of my home, cut off Dorian, and make every future choice for me. The hearing was scheduled for exactly 14 days later. I hired a lawyer the next morning. She had seen my story online and reached out offering a reduced rate. She specialized in adult protection cases and had dealt with similar filings used as control tactics. She told me this wasn't new, just rare and hard to win if the other party fights back properly. So we started building my defense. Dorian's publisher immediately submitted a character statement. They included the timeline of his promotion pause and reinstatement, and how I had helped clear his name. 2 of my freelance clients wrote letters about my professionalism, how I met deadlines, managed contracts, and even helped expand their content reach. My old professor from college sent an email detailing my leadership in group projects and my ability to handle pressure. We added all of that to my file. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Lucinda contacted my lawyer. She had been one of my mother's longtime friends until a few years ago, when her daughter married someone who worked as a mechanic. My mother had called the man manual labor trash at a dinner party, and they hadn't spoken since. Lucinda offered to testify on my behalf. My lawyer also advised I undergo a psychological evaluation from a licensed therapist, just to close any loophole. I went through the process, sessions, questionnaires, even a home visit to document my living situation. The report came back clear. No signs of emotional manipulation, financial instability, or cognitive dysfunction. On the day of the hearing, we showed up early. My mother arrived 15 minutes late in a tailored coat, pearl earrings, and heels like she was attending a luncheon. Her lawyer carried a thick folder and looked like he had something to prove. Inside the courtroom, things moved fast. My lawyer went first, laying out our timeline with documents and printed exhibits. She introduced the statements, the evaluation, and confirmed the restraining order violation was still being investigated separately. Then it was my mother's turn. She took the stand and told the judge I had been taken over by a predator, that I lived in unsafe conditions, and that I had delusions of independence. She brought up Dorian's finances, his lack of a car, his art as unmarketable, and claimed I had no idea how to survive on my own. She even said I had once asked for money, a single $20 Venmo transfer I used for a cab, when my debit card failed. Then my lawyer asked her about the tracker necklace. My mother tried to deny it, but we had the police report, a text breakdown of the device, and the exact time it pinged to her home IP address. The judge raised his eyebrows and leaned forward, asking why she had placed a tracking device on her adult daughter's personal belongings. She went silent for a moment, and then started blaming online influence, claiming people were brainwashing me. The judge cut her off. Dorian was the last to speak. He didn't defend himself. He just spoke clearly, explaining how we met, how we worked together, and how he had stayed out of everything until her actions threatened both our safety and my livelihood. He never raised his voice once. The judge ruled within 10 minutes. The petition was denied. He called it an appalling abuse of the legal system and said the evidence showed a pattern of manipulation, not mental instability. He even ordered a warning notation on the case file so it couldn't be refiled under a different pretense without strict review. That's when my mother lost control. She stood up in court and screamed that everyone was letting her daughter be ruined by poverty. She knocked over her folder, accused the judge of being biased, and had to be removed by a bailiff. The judge cleared the room immediately after, just in case she tried to come back. The next morning, her lawyer filed a notice that he was dropping her as a client. The clerk called my lawyer to inform us the case was fully closed. Legally, her last power move had failed. But even with the petition denied, I knew it wasn't over. It's not with someone like her. Not yet. The week after the court dismissed my mother's guardianship petition, things went public. A local paper ran a story about online abuse from controlling parents. They used aliases for everyone involved, but the details were too specific. People in my hometown connected the dots fast. Within 2 days, someone from the neighborhood messaged me a photo of a flyer pinned to the bulletin board at a community center. My full name wasn't on it, but it had my college photo, old yearbook quotes, and the phrase under cult influence, pray for her return. The same flyer showed up at a local cafe, inside a laundromat, even at the library. They all came from the same home printer, black ink smudges, cut edges, grainy quality. Then came the church stunt. She took the pulpit during a Sunday service and gave a speech claiming her daughter had been taken by anti-Christian ideologies and that my partner was a wolf in artistic clothing. I only found out because someone recorded it and sent me the video. The clip got shared in group chats. I watched myself become the center of a sermon I hadn't asked for. My mother didn't stop at me. She turned on my father too. In a follow-up speech during a church brunch, she called him passive and weak, blamed him for allowing this corruption, and hinted that he had always been indifferent to the spiritual future of his family. That's when things really broke apart. 2 nights later, my father messaged me. I filed for separation. He said it had been building for a long time, but seeing her turn the church into a weapon finally broke something in him. It was the first time he had ever taken action against her in any meaningful way. He told me she'd crossed too many lines, and he couldn't live under the same roof anymore. I didn't push for details. He sounded clear, exhausted, but clear. A few days after that, I got an email from one of the church's senior pastors. He said he'd seen what was happening and was embarrassed. He apologized on behalf of the church and clarified that she'd acted without any support from leadership. The church board met later that week and placed her on a leave of absence from the event planning committee. Not long after, she launched a blog. The title was How I Lost My Daughter to Greed and Lust. It was filled with dramatic fiction dressed up as fact, posts about how I snuck out at night to meet strange men, how I stole from her to buy makeup, and how I begged for expensive things and then turned around and embraced poverty. None of it was real. She wrote like she was submitting to a tabloid editor, and people started reading it. I posted my response online, titled How Wealth Broke My Mother. It was a short article with embedded call logs, screenshots of her emails, and police reports, each one carefully redacted but clearly structured. I added a timeline of key events and included short voice clips of her threats. I didn't accuse her. I let her own words speak. The article spread fast. Newsletters picked it up, activist pages reposted it. I got an email from a clothing brand that promotes economic justice. They asked if I'd write a series of short essays for their fall campaign, pieces about parental pressure, wealth expectations, and estrangement. I accepted. One of the essays led to an invitation to speak at a college panel for young creatives navigating toxic family systems. I accepted that too. The event had about 50 people. I was halfway through answering a question about class-based pressure when someone in the third row stood up and shouted my name. It was her. She had bought a ticket under a fake name and waited until the QA to start heckling. She called me ungrateful, accused the panel of encouraging daughters to betray mothers, and waved around a folder of printed blog posts. A few students started yelling back. Security came in and escorted her out. She screamed the whole way. I didn't stop the talk. I just kept going like she wasn't there. 3 days later, I received a letter from her lawyer, or rather, a new one. She was threatening to sue me for defamation. My lawyer sent back a short response. Every piece of content I had posted was factual, documented, and protected. She never followed through. Instead of trying to fix ties with old friends who had vanished when things got tough, I started pouring into the ones who had stayed. The friend who sent me the video from the church. The client who backed me when my mother tried to sabotage my work. The professor who checked in every month like clockwork. That group became my base. Meanwhile, Dorian's graphic novel, loosely inspired by our story, took off. It landed on a bestseller list and turned into a cult favorite among readers who resonated with themes of control and escape. His publisher expanded the press run and offered him a second deal. The book was everywhere. Bookstores, podcasts, fan art accounts. But I still knew one thing. She wasn't done yet. Even with the court orders, the church embarrassment, the blog meltdown, the panel disruption, there was something in her that wouldn't let go. And something told me she had one last play left. Dorian proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. No audience, no cameras, no fancy restaurant. We were sitting on a blanket eating leftovers when he pulled out a simple silver ring and asked if I wanted to keep building a life together. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We didn't post anything. No just engaged photo, no announcement. It was ours, and we planned to keep it that way. We decided on a small wedding. 35 guests. People who had stood beside us through everything. No extended family, no coworkers, no acquaintances trying to network. Just friends we trusted, a few of Dorian's relatives, and my father, who had quietly filed for divorce and moved into a small apartment 3 towns over. He RSVP'd through email and didn't write anything except "I'll be there." That was enough. Because of everything that had happened, we took extra precautions. We hired 2 private security guards, set up a guest checkpoint at the venue entrance, and gave every guest a digital code that had to be shown at entry. Phones were allowed, but we asked everyone not to post anything until after the wedding. No dates, no location tags, nothing. The venue was tucked in a wooded area just outside the city. Small garden, warm lights, quiet paths. It was the opposite of everything my mother would have planned. No chandeliers, no centerpieces made of orchids, no champagne tower. Just long wooden tables, homemade food, and music from a friend's speaker system. A week before the wedding, we noticed something odd. My second cousin, who we had invited reluctantly, posted a vague Instagram story showing the venue gates with a caption that said, "Something magical coming soon." No names, no direct clues, but if you were looking for it, it wasn't hard to figure out. We asked him to delete it, and he did. But it was already too late. On the day of the wedding, everything was calm, until 15 minutes before the ceremony. A woman in a beige trench coat arrived at the checkpoint, carrying a white bouquet and demanding to be let in. She claimed she was the mother of the bride and shouted that her daughter was being sacrificed to poverty in front of God and everyone. Security stopped her at the gate. She started yelling louder. It was my mother. She dyed her hair darker and wore a wig cap underneath like it was a disguise. The bouquet was fake, plastic roses wrapped in tulle. She wore heels, heavy makeup, and a pin that said "Proud Mother" across her lapel. The guards asked her to leave. She refused and started a scene, loud, dramatic, theatrical. She accused Dorian of stealing me. She called my father a coward. She called our guests poverty enablers. Most people stood quietly. A few stepped away. Some looked at me, unsure what to do. The wedding coordinator asked if we should call the police. I told her to wait. I walked out in my dress. No veil, no train, just the same simple white slip I'd picked out at a consignment shop. I walked straight to the gate, stopped 3 feet from her, and told her calmly that she needed to leave, or security would call the police again. She looked me up and down, stunned that I was standing there without crying or begging. Then she asked, "So this is it? You're choosing that man over your future?" I replied, "No, I'm choosing my future over your fantasy." She stood frozen for a moment. Then she started crying, big, loud sobs, the kind that sound more like a performance than pain. She muttered something about betrayal, about how she had built everything and I had thrown it all away. The police arrived 6 minutes later. One officer recognized her name from our previous reports. They gave her 2 choices, leave peacefully or be taken in. She left. Loudly, dramatically, but without a fight. She was gone before the ceremony even began. We started the wedding 20 minutes late. I wiped my face, fixed my lipstick, and walked down the aisle barefoot. The officiant didn't even mention what happened. We just kept going. Dorian's vows weren't long. He talked about choosing partnership over control, joy over approval, and how real wealth wasn't measured in money, but in peace. People cried. I cried too, but not because of my mother. Because for the first time in my life, the future was mine. We danced under string lights that night. No spotlight, no photographers shouting directions. Just slow music, laughter, and plates filled with food someone's grandma had made. Friends gave speeches about love and choosing your own story. My father stood in the back and raised his glass once, then sat down quietly. Somewhere out there, I knew my mother was watching all of it unravel. Not the way she wanted, not with elite guests, or fancy cars, or photos for social media clout, but exactly how it needed to.